Since we've been talking about color, we're now going to move on to a more artistic project, kind of based on Andy Warhol. What you're going to do is you're going to use a very high contrasting photo. Remember that it needs to be high contrasting. If it's not, then you won't get as good of effect. And you're going to kind of turn it into the 4-panel technique that was made popular by Andy Warhol through the pop art era. The first thing you need to do is go to Image Adjustments and make it black and white. All of these adjustments are going to change the actual layer. So here's my black and white, and all of this is okay. This just controls the different channels. We don't really want to mess with these, so I'm going to click OK. We want to unlock this layer, and if you remember, you double click and then click OK, and you can rename it Image. It's important to keep your layers organized. And the other way to do an adjustment is to go to the Adjustments palette. If you don't see the Adjustment palette, you can go to Window and click on Adjustments, and then it should show up right here. So we did the black and white through the menu bar right here. We're going to do levels through the Adjustment palette. And notice what happens when I click on Levels. It adds a new layer. So now, instead of changing the actual layer, we're going to change the layer above it. So everything below this is going to be affected by what we do here. We want a very high contrasting effect on this. It's a pretty high contrast photo, but we want to exaggerate it even more. So I'm going to take my light triangle here and move it in really far until I still have detail in my lightest areas, but it's very, very washed out. And I'll come in a little bit on the dark side. Same thing here. I want to have a lot of washed out areas, but still be able to see the detail. The next thing we need to do is to add a new layer. And for this layer, we're going to start adding color. First thing is to move the opacity down to around 50. And this changes the opacity for just this layer. Remember, opacity has to do with the color that's put on the image and how opaque it is or how transparent that it is. So if I grab my brush tool and I have this blue color selected here and I start to paint blue, you can see through it a little bit there. And you can play around with this and see what the higher and the lower, it just makes it more transparent. Before you begin, you want to make sure that you have a hard brush, and you can make the brush however large you want it to be. Remember your brackets, they make it so that the brush gets bigger without having to go up here all the time. And I'm going to cover the background with this color. I am not going to be terribly concerned about the edges here because we're kind of basing this off of Andy Warhol, and his edges were not very pronounced either. So we're not going to do any special effects to try to get the edges. If you're a very exact person, if you want things to be perfect, then this is a time where you can let your hair down a little bit. If you happen to go way far in one place, like here, you have two options. You can either Command Z, or you can come back in and get your eraser tool and just bring that back out. Okay, so I have that color. Now I'm going to do a new layer for a new color. Every time you change colors, get a new layer. Don't forget. And change your color. Andy Warhol generally did a triadic color scheme, so you can do that. You can also try one of the other contrasting color schemes. Just make sure you are following a color scheme, be it complementary, split complementary, triadic. Probably not neutral though. Oops, I have the eraser. Grab your brush tool and make sure that you turn the opacity down to 50 or so. Might be important to zoom in. Now grab your eraser tool and erase out anything that you need to. All right, now things are starting to look really interesting. Add a new layer and let's put on some hair color. Again, continuing with my triadic color scheme.